Welcome to the Table Explainer video series. What is food sovereignty? The concept of food sovereignty was made popular in the 1990s by rural social movements from around the world. In response to the Green Revolution and the introduction of global free trade policies, many peasant organisations came together to draw attention to the struggles of small-scale farmers and the ecological impacts of industrial farming. In the last 25 years, the concept of food sovereignty and its associated political framework have united a wide range of actors, including farm and food workers, fisherfolk, pastoralists, consumers, academics, and urban food justice organisations. As the food sovereignty movement has grown in its membership, the definitions of food sovereignty have evolved. It is now commonly defined as the right of peoples to healthy and culturally appropriate food produced through ecologically sound and sustainable methods, and their right to define their own food and agriculture systems. The food sovereignty movement seeks to challenge inequalities of power in the food system. It clearly stands against the dominance of industrial agricultural practices, the growing power of corporations, and the undemocratic governance of food and agricultural trade. The food sovereignty movement generally promotes agroecology, peasant and family farming, and local or regional food systems with shorter distances between where food is produced and consumed. However, definitions of food sovereignty remain relatively open, as the food sovereignty movement prioritises democratic and inclusive decision-making and context-specific solutions. For many years, definitions of food security used by the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization focused on availability of and access to food. Food sovereignty was promoted as an alternative concept that rejected understandings of food as a commodity and source of profit, and framed hunger and malnutrition as a political problem rather than a technical challenge. Over time, definitions of food security have expanded to acknowledge the social, economic and political mechanisms governing food distribution and the importance of agency and equity. The two concepts are now much more closely aligned. However, food sovereignty is generally associated with grassroots political action, and food security is used more widely by policymakers and intergovernmental organisations. Critics both within and from outside the movement have raised questions about the realities of food sovereignty and how it will be achieved. For example, what role would trade play in a food sovereignty framework? Under what conditions would global trade be acceptable? And how might a food sovereign trade system be generated? Should the food sovereignty movement focus their efforts on changing state policy and global trade rules, or on building autonomous local food systems? Some critics question whether it will be possible to create food systems that meet the diverse needs of different groups involved in the food sovereignty movement. They point out that producers and consumers often have conflicting economic interests and would not necessarily favour localised agroecological food systems. Many people raise questions about the governance structures demanded by food sovereignty. At what scale should food systems be governed, and what processes and institutions will help achieve food sovereignty and democratic legitimacy? Should the state play a key role? And if so, what changes is it able to make in the larger context of global free trade agreements and corporate consolidation? These questions are somewhat inevitable, as the food sovereignty movement is made up of multiple different constituencies and groups. The movement prioritises the autonomy of its members and their right to determine their food future, rather than insisting on a specific unified vision. Nevertheless, as many people recognise, answering some of these questions might further strengthen the movement and help it to achieve its goals of generating context-specific transformation and challenging power inequalities in the food system. For more information on this topic, you can read the full explainer at tabledebates.org.